you folks know better than anybody the enormous challenges that are being faced by housing authorities and residents because of this pandemic. And Annette's just described some of the work that you've already done. That's very, it's very concrete. It's very touchable. Masks, health, you know, all those important kinds of day-to-day things that we're all worried about and that housing authorities are worried about. But so what we're going to talk about today is just one part of the work that residents and housing authorities and mostly DHCD are doing, which is a little less concrete. Can't touch it and feel it, but it's ways in which they are issuing new policies to adjust rent, especially, but not entirely, to help working and unemployed tenants cope with the amazing challenges that they're facing right now. So for the moment, we'll concentrate on DHCD. We'll go to federal, and then we can take, how does this work, Sarah? Afterwards, we'll do questions?
Yeah, so we'll hold questions, and then we'll get anyone who has one, we'll get a list of folks who have questions, and then we'll go through them like that. Also, is there someone new who joined us with a 781 area code on the phone?
And Wanda has just joined, I think.
Haven't introduced yourself. Wanda. Oh, hi, Wanda. Yes, please introduce yourself.
She's muted.
Wanda, can you unmute yourself and say your name and what housing authority you're in? Go ahead.
Sure. Hi, my name is Wanda Velez Jusino, and I'm at Commonwealth Development.
Oh,
yeah.
Is that federal or state, Wanda?
Federal.
Okay.
Oh, right. Wanda, we met. Great. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? And then the person on the 781 area code, can you introduce yourself, please?
He's muted.
Gotta hit *6 to unmute on the phone. Okay, well, maybe we'll try to get that person later. If you are on the phone, reminder to mute yourself using *6 and unmute yourself again using *6. Okie doke.
Okay, so we're gonna learn about some adjustment of rent policies. In some ways, the largest of which and the biggest of which are to help working and unemployed tenants cope with the COVID-19 challenges. So working with Mass Law Reform and Mass Union on May 11th, DHCD, again for state public housing and state vouchers, issued emergency COVID rent policies. And we'd all been working on these for a while, and it came out actually better. It came out really well. So I'm not telling you anything you know. Typically, when your income increases in public housing and voucher programs, your rent also increases. It may be different for you guys that are in hybrid housing, you're in red housing, something else, so we'll talk about that otherwise. But in the typical sense for public housing and vouchers, your income goes up, your rent goes up. But during this crisis, we have, well, it depends how much your income goes up, but generally that's true. During this crisis, there are temporary exceptions to the normal rent rules. So let's go through them on the handout that you've got. How do people get this? Sarah, how does this work? Have they seen this?
Oh, sorry. Yes, everyone got it in an email from Bianca this morning.
Okay.
I can also put it up on the screen.
Okay, however you think best. So let's go through some of it. And this is just a summary. It's not every detail. So first, if your household's employment income has increased, typically that means you get a raise, although for some of you who might be self-employed, it might mean that your employment income went up, although that's very rare during the pandemic. But if your income, if you have gotten a raise essentially since March 1st, the Housing Authority cannot raise your rent as it normally would do in June and July above the March 1st level. Your rent will be capped at the March 1st level. The reason this is so important, and it is the single most progressive and fairest rent policy in the country, is that typically these are very low wage workers who are working on the front lines, who are doing all kinds of jobs, certified nurse assistants, working in Walmarts, delivering pizza, all kinds of jobs, or working in other ways that are making it safe for people like me, for instance, who are staying home. So it's very important. These folks, when they get rent increase, when they get wage increases, their rents essentially will not be increased. June and July. This policy ends July 31st unless it's extended. I mean, we, like everything else about COVID, we're not quite sure what's happening from week to week. At the moment, it's scheduled to end July 31st. So that's very important, and that's for workers. That's number one. That's employment income. The second bullet there is about households whose income increases because they're receiving unemployment. And typically in Massachusetts, that means they're getting a combination of regular unemployment, which is about 50% of your normal wages, and the very large federal special expanded unemployment that's $600 a week that came from Congress when they passed what's known as the CARES Act. So for folks who are unemployed and whose income increases because of this $600 a week and their regular unemployment, that income increase essentially in effect won't be counted, and their rent won't be increased beyond the March 1st level until July 31st. So those are two big things, those two groups: working folks whose income increases and unemployed folks whose income increases because of their unemployment. If it turns out in some housing authorities that these folks' rents were raised either by mistake or the policy wasn't clear or they got some kind of a lump sum, if that happened in April or May, they should be getting rebates or credits. In other words, their rent should not have gone up in April or May. And finally, the federal stimulus payment to individuals, couples, and children, which for individuals are $1,200, and possibly many people on this call got that individual payment, $1,200, $2,400 for couples, $500 for kids. That one-time federal stimulus payment also will not count as an income increase, and your rent won't be raised because of that. So those are important policies about increases that change the usual system and kind of turn it on its head and said, yep, you're getting more money, but your rent won't go up. So those are some of the big ones. Then what about decreases? Especially if you live in state public housing, you may know that you can report income decreases as often as your income decreases. There's no limit. For a lot of federal housing, and I think perhaps at Cambridge, it's an MTW agency, I'm not sure, there's a limit to how often you can report increases. But for sure in state public housing and vouchers, you can report decreases as often as they happen. So the changes about decreases are largely about how much proof and when you have to submit it. Typically, when you tell your housing authority that your income has decreased, you have to have a lot of verification, and until you satisfy the verification requirements, the rent isn't going to get decreased in the next month. But now, DHCD has said to housing authorities, you can be much more lenient in various ways about this. Now, how many housing authorities are being lenient and whether they're taking that option that DHCD gave them, I don't know. But what does it mean to be lenient? For many, and the best thing would be is if you lose your job, let's say, before you ever get your unemployment, and you call or email or somehow talk to the housing authority and say, I have lost my job, they could just say, okay, we'll take your word for it, but in 2 or 3 weeks, and so we'll decrease your rent next month, but in 30 days or 60 days or some amount of time, you need to get us the documentation proving that. And that's very important, and it never happened before. But given how difficult it is to get paperwork together and to supply paperwork and to, you know, I mean, your business might not even be functioning at this moment that you lost your job. So that's really important. And there are other ways for income decreases that, again, a housing authority can be more lenient, and certainly more lenient in the way you report it. There's all kinds of ways that everybody could be creative about, even when you get documentation, what to do. You can take pictures of it and send it in, and the housing authority should be okay with that. And given the housing authority's own staff's own difficulties and how overworked they are and how far away from work some of them are, usually that works pretty well. And eventually you can report into us if it's not. So those are decreases. If you're on a fixed income, and we said like Social Security, SSI, TAFDC, or perhaps a fixed pension, your rent, the rules won't change for you. Everything will be done as it was before. So, for example, if your income increases because of COLA, the cost of living increase for, let's say, Social Security, or an increase in your SSI, or for other reasons, if a family member starts to receive public benefits, your recalculated rent will include that additional income. It's only unemployment income and earned income increases that aren't counted. So that's something. We'll do a little more, and hold on. These policies are expected to last through July 31st, and one of the reasons that July 31st is picked is because the federal $600 a week expanded unemployment benefit, that only runs through July 31st unless Congress changes that. And who knows what Mitch McConnell's going to do with that. So we'll find out. Let's see. So other temporary changes to rent policies. For state public housing, there's a minimum rent. I wrote this. I said $5. Is that correct? Is that what it is? I guess it is.
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
We're fighting not to make it go up higher.
Thank you. Keep fighting. $5 is low enough, but nevertheless, it can't be charged during this time. No minimum rent during this time, and you don't have to show anything. There's just no minimum rent. Late fees. Typically, someone doesn't pay their rent or is at least more than a month late. The housing authority can charge a late fee, but during this temporary period, they cannot charge a late fee. And then some general things to remember, and it's important that you tell the folks that you work with about this, which is, A, you still have to pay your rent, or you'll still owe your rent for sure. The housing authority can send you a notice saying your rent is in arrears, you owe us X amount. And they're allowed to do that. And if anything is confusing about it, of course, contact your housing authority. If your income increases for some of the reasons we discussed, or for other reasons, your household income might increase for reasons other than employment or unemployment. But if your household income increases, make sure that you report those increases just as before. Your income goes up, you can report it. Even if your rent doesn't increase, you still should be reporting it, okay? And again, changes in income either way, up or down, you should be able to use any technical means, any way of doing that works for you, including if your housing authorities have drop boxes now in front of their offices so you don't have to go into the office, that's another way to do it. And you can tell us afterwards if that's been a problem. And finally, thanks to housing advocates, community groups, Mass Law Reform worked very hard on this, Greater Boston Legal Services. There is a statewide eviction moratorium that lasts until August 18th. So it's not just a moratorium on taking you to court, which is rare in these days anyway, but it's a moratorium on sending you any kind of communication that says, watch out, you could be evicted for non-payment of rent. That would be something for an informal conference or a notice to quit. None of those things can happen. No part of the eviction process can happen until at least August 18th. You can get a notice saying, you know, you owe rent, but nothing indicating that you're going to be suffering an eviction during that time. So those are some of the, there are others, but those are some of the policies that DHCD has put out. Let me tell you quickly about what HUD did. HUD got permission from Congress to waive, meaning just not pay attention, that housing authorities can waive all kinds of federal regulations about, not just about rent, but about a whole range of things. And HUD puts out a lot of documents saying, hey, federal housing authority, here's the waivers that you can work on. And here's just some of the ones that are similar to the ones that we've just talked about with DHCD. So here's a couple that are similar. The one-time federal stimulus payment, the $1,200, $2,400, $500, that doesn't count as income, and therefore your rent can't be increased because you received that. Similarly, the federal enhanced $600 a week federal unemployment benefit does not count as income for federal public housing and Section 8 vouchers, and doesn't count as housing, and your rent won't go up because of that. And that program itself ends on July 31st, unless Congress does something. So that's how long that lasts. From March 27th to July 24th, which is the day that the federal eviction moratorium ends, there's a state one and a federal one. LHAs, very much like DHCD said, are allowed to adopt income reporting policies that are much less strict. And again, advocates work very hard just to let self-certification work so that what's reported to the housing authorities is the time that the income went down, not when you have all the paperwork together to report it, which could be a month later or 2 months. There is the state eviction moratorium, as we said before, and that certainly applies to anyone in federal public housing because it applies to every tenant in the Commonwealth. And finally, similar to DHCD, a housing authority can't charge late fees for non-payment during this period till July 24th. It's not clear what they can do after July 24th, but at least during this time they can. Some of the differences from state policy. In state policy, any unemployment you receive, the regular unemployment or the $600 a week, even combined, that essentially won't count as an increase because they'll figure your rent back to March 1st. But for federal, they will continue to count regular unemployment as income. So whether or not that increases your income, it probably doesn't, but nevertheless, they'll count it. And the big difference is earned income of the workers who are working and who might get raises. They're going to pay a higher rent in federal housing. That is, it gets counted, and if it's an increase to their income, their rent will go up. And that's what's so good about the work we did with DHCD, because it treats people who are unemployed. It's okay, Sarah, we can get this off the screen now if you want. It treats people who are unemployed, but got some increases in their pizza delivery wages or their CNA wages, and people who are unemployed, people who were employed and got wage increases and people who are unemployed and got their unemployment benefits. They're not treated differently. And that's very, very fair, because we don't want the people who are employed to be getting a rent increase. So that's a quick run through of this. I'm sorry, it was a lot at once, so I'm happy to take any questions that come along.
Great, thanks, Judith. Okay, so what we do now is, if you have a question, just let me know. Don't ask the question, and I'm going to get a list of folks, and then we'll go through the list. Okay, so if you have a question, you can unmute yourself on the computer or using *6. I see Wanda's hand. Who else? So we're not going to ask the question yet. Okay, Randy's hand. Who else has a question? Phyllis, Ed. Who else? Somebody's phone is ringing. Valerie. Okay, so I've got Wanda, Randy, Phyllis, Ed, Valerie. And then we'll do that round, and if we have time, we can take more. Okay, so Wanda, do you want to go ahead and go first?
Sure. So as far as I know, this isn't happening to anyone here, but I do know a person who lives in Section 8, and they've lost their job, and the landlord actually gave them an eviction notice and gave her 30 days to get out. And, you know, I know that that's not right and that's illegal right now, but this woman is actually getting ready to leave her apartment because she got this eviction notice.
Okay, I'll start, and then Annette will go further. The very first thing she should do immediately is contact who's ever administering her Section 8 program, and they'll get down on the landlord. I mean, that's just the easiest thing.
Okay.
And then Annette, you take it from there.
Yes, no evictions can happen right now. People cannot get notices. She should stay put. And she should also contact her local legal services office.
Okay.
They're taking calls, and they're trying to monitor the how this eviction moratorium is working or not working.
Okay.
So if you have the area where she is, we can get you the legal services phone number.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Wanda.
I'm not really sure which I want to say it's either Cambridge or